This is a short story of mine. It's called Out of the Blue. This was it. It had to be. The site he'd been searching for the past 3 months since his first tentative steps onto the dark web. It seemed perfect. He kicked student detritus under the sofa as he headed for the kitchenette in search of a Hershey bar and another can of lager to celebrate. His mind a maelstrom of dark thoughts and bright ideas. He scarcely noticed the dirty coffee cups, plates and assorted kitchenalia waiting patiently in the sink. He didn't even register that the ceiling light cluster was down to a single dingy bulb, or the worrying smell emanating from behind the fridge. All that mattered now was getting down to business and registering. He decided years ago what pseudonym to use, if, or indeed when, the time ever came. But as he sat down in front of his tired PC to start his big adventure, he had to wipe sweat from his palms. It all came down to this. Welcome to Blue Sky. Name? Here goes nothing. Moriarty. The cursor was flashing longer than necessary and his heart raced. We're sorry, Moriarty is already taken. Name? Shit. Moriarty 007. Welcome to Blue Sky, Moriarty 007. Please enter a valid email address. 5 minutes later, Patrick Horstairs from Dagenham was a fully fledged member of the Blue Sky Club. He'd had to give real details about himself, of course, but he still couldn't believe it, at last. A great wave of relief flooded every nerve ending, yet he found he didn't quite know what to do with himself now. The website had promised email confirmation once his application had been verified, but that would take at least 24 hours. That meant there had to be a real person somewhere carrying out real checks on him. Wow. They wouldn't find anything, of course, because there was nothing to find. No criminal record, no shoddy credit history, not so much as an unpaid parking ticket. He was clean. He had to be an ideal club member. He wandered back to the kitchenette and started doing the washing up. A street light was shining through the single window. It must be gone to 3 by now, he thought. He could see his reflection in the grimy glass and studied his face. He wished his bum fluff would sort itself into a beard, and he'd have to tidy himself up a bit before he met his crime team. But other than that, he was just an ordinary student of no particular note. He smiled to himself. That's just the way it should be, a perfect disguise. The Dog and Rocket was a bustling, boozy kind of place where the locals managed to rub along with strangers, provided they all pushed off before 9 o'clock and didn't empty a fruit machine. It was close to a tube station and found a willing clientele working in the nearby offices, and nipped in for a pint or two after work before heading home, and just as often by couples meeting on the sly. It had taken Patrick 20 minutes to get there on his bike, which was chained, securely he hoped, to a lamppost outside. He'd managed to find a seat at a table with his back to the wall, from which he could survey both the bar and the door. And being well pleased with himself until he'd had to nip for a piss and come back to find 2 old grumps sat at his table playing dominoes. One of them owned a terrier that sat by his feet, its evil face apparently set in a permanent snarl. Patrick had dragged his rucksack and bike helmet out from under the table, lest the sly beast start humping them or some such. He was now wedged uncomfortably between one of the old grumps and the wooden end of a window seat, his rucksack and helmet on his lap, and nowhere to put his pint down. Worse still, while he could still see some of the bar, his view of the door was almost non-existent. He gave up and went to get a refill. It was as he was draining his glass that he heard a gruff voice further down the bar ask for a bottle of Blue Sky. He froze for a second. That had to be the contact. There were too many people in the way and he couldn't see the person who'd ordered the drink, but he watched in fascination as the barman turned to a fridge at knee level and retrieved what appeared to be a bottle of foreign beer. He didn't see where the customer went after paying for his drink, but he figured he'd be able to find him. After all, how many people in this pub would be drinking a foreign beer no one had ever heard of? He knew exactly what to order, and having hoisted his rucksack, his bike helmet firmly attached to it by its strap, made his way through the crowds to find the man with the matching bottle. It didn't take him long. He was a short, square-shaped brute of around 30 with a flat and bristly face and an incongruously long nose. He was sat at a booth across from a taller, thinner man who appeared older and more carefully groomed. They both sat back in their seats as Patrick approached, as though they'd been talking. The taller man nodded at Patrick's bottle, smiled briefly, and indicated with a mellifluous hand that he should sit with them. He was enthralled and petrified all at once. Supposing these giants of the underworld rejected him or beat him up? Well, they wouldn't, would they? Not just like that. They'd listen to what he had to bring to the table at least. And when all was said and done, he'd set out to be just like them. For a while at least. He gathered his courage and settled into the seat next to Longnose. He didn't so much stiffen as simply remained immovably still. The taller man had a cultured accent, but Patrick couldn't tell if it was put on or not. You appear to have found Mr. Blue Sky and Mr. Blue Sky, Mr. Patrick was about to say Patrick, but realised it was a test. Moriarty 007, he corrected. The tall man smiled slightly. Welcome, Moriarty 007. You may call me Caesar. And the gentleman sat next to you is Genghis. Genghis's nod was almost imperceptible. I take it you would care to join us on our next jaunt, but before we can consider that, perhaps you would care to tell us a little bit more about yourself and why you joined Blue Sky. Caesar leant back and folded his arms. Not in a judgmental way, Patrick thought, but in a we haven't made up our minds about you yet sort of way. Patrick took a quick look around the pub. It was still heaving, but no one was paying them any attention. He'd waited for this moment for years, but he didn't want to appear too eager, and took a slug of Blue Sky before answering, and was horrified when some of it fell out of his mouth and into his beard. His companions appeared not to notice. He took a breath, and the story came out in something of a rush. I always wanted to take part in a big job, you know, like a bank robbery or a security trap or something. If only someone would ask. I'd do it once and I'd do it big, so I was pretty well set up for life and then never need to do it again. I ain't greedy. That way it would be almost impossible for the cops to catch me, because even if I left DNA, there'd be no way to trace me because I haven't got a record, and they'd have no reason to suspect me. And I've got a bottle to go through with it, and the brains too. I'd even sit on a dosh for a year or two, if necessary, till everything cools off. I can be patient. There, he thought proudly. He'd said it. He told experienced hoods the one thing that had been on his mind for years. He could be a safe and solid member of the team, turn his hand to anything, except shooting someone. He'd better make that clear, he thought. No, I don't mind what you want me to do, but I don't want to have to shoot no one. That was better, that made it clear. Caesar unclasped his hands and leant forward with a more genuine smile. Well, Moriarty, you've been very honest with us. Patrick noticed he dropped the 007 and took it as a good sign. Even Genghis seemed slightly less solid. Patrick made a fair attempt at holding Caesar's gaze and reached for his own drink. Careful to note where his mouth was this time. For our part, you can rest assured that we have considerable experience in the crime field, and we'll need to consider carefully what role we would need you for. The project is local, and you would appear to be a capable young man. It occurs to me that you might be suitable as a distraction runner. He raised his eyebrows as if waiting to hear what Patrick thought. But after his initial introduction, his mind had turned to glue, and he couldn't think what the man meant. Fortunately, Caesar appeared to recognise this and explained, once the police are alerted to our activities, you will move swiftly away from the crime scene as a diversion. They will hopefully follow you, and not the rest of the gang, who will exit by a different route. And does that sound like something you would be able to do? Patrick gave it some thought. He was pretty nifty on his bike. He could weave in and out of traffic with the best of them, and use some really useful shortcuts. They'd have to sort out a route, of course, and somewhere he could stash the bike and mingle with the crowd if necessary, but He reckoned he could outpace a few filth over a couple of miles. Probably, he answered. As long as I don't have to carry anything too heavy. I mean, I'll have to look like I'm carrying loot, even if I'm not, wouldn't I? Caesar was baffled until he remembered the rucksack with the cycle gear stuffed down by the boy's feet. Ah, you're thinking of getaway by bicycle. I've been thinking more in terms of a car. But a bicycle's not a bad idea, thinking about it. I can see you're going to be very useful to the team. Patrick almost exploded with pride. The idea's becoming thick and fast now. I could stuff me rucksack with bubble wrap. That'd make it bulge out nicely, but would scarcely weigh anything. And Genghis decided to interject at this point. Stirring his square bulk towards Patrick, he announced solemnly, "We don't do fuck-ups. The Blue Sky Club does it properly, right?" Patrick looked between Genghis and Caesar in terror and tried to swallow the golf ball in his throat. But the taller man merely smiled and shrugged amiably. "Don't worry about Genghis here. He gets very protective of our little plans. But he does have a point," he went on seriously. "We're not at home to Mr. Bosch's job, Moriarty. We like to think things through properly, and we're very good at it. Now, about remuneration." Patrick relaxed a bit, although Genghis still seemed to be paying close attention, even though he turned back to his drink. "We will provide you with a small sum for equipment and so on, which you will be expected to obtain yourself. Assuming our current venture is a success, your fee will be £25,000. Does this sound satisfactory to you?" Patrick was disappointed he wasn't being offered more, but had a feeling, no, I was hoping for a couple of £100,000 wasn't the answer they were anticipating. Well, 25 grand was 25 grand. He could do a lot with that. He nodded reluctantly, and if Caesar noticed the lack of eagerness, he didn't show it. "Good. Well, we'll be in touch by email in the next 2 or 3 days with the details. In the meantime," he glanced at Genghis, who sucked his teeth in affirmation, "Now please don't let us detain you further." In some ways, the meeting had been a bit of an anticlimax. On the other hand, he was in. Patrick left the Dog and Rocket casually, keeping his facial expression neutral. He didn't want to look like an amateur. Fortunately, his bike was still chained to the lamppost outside, and still had its wheels. Unfortunately, it no longer had its saddle. He sighed and prepared himself for the uncomfortable ride home. Back in the booth, the shorter man turned to the taller one and asked sourly, "You reckon he'll do?" "Oh yes, I'm sure he will. If he gets caught, there's no way he could lead the net back to us. It's not as though our descriptions are in the database, is it?" He chuckled gently. "Which reminds me, you'd better take down the website before the raid, and in the unlikely event he manages to get away, we'll get one of the boys to slip him a couple of grand, and a few broken ribs if he balks at it." Caesar sat back. He was satisfied with how the evening had gone. The boy was a twit, of course, but he'd have the net chasing their tails for weeks. He looked across at his cantankerous partner's empty bottle. "Another blue sky, Sergeant?"